second session about board coaching. We're going to get straight into it with Joy, our visitor today, introducing herself.
Thank you, Claire, and hello, everyone. I'm Joy Marie Lawrence. I'm also a coach. I'm a PCC coach with the ICF, and I've worked in corporate, and I've also sit on boards currently. I chair boards, and I'm also a non-executive director. And I've been in the boardroom for a number of years, both from my corporate time and then also as a non-executive director. And that's pretty much where I've also found for myself my niche, bringing in my coaching skills into the boardroom, both in supporting and leading boards, but also in the work that I do at Board Advisory with boards and individual board directors. So I'm looking forward to just sharing some of those insights and listening to the questions and learning from you as well as we engage in the conversations about how we can support boards and board directors in being effective, certainly in the boardroom from my perspective. So thank you. I'm based in South Africa. So I bring you the greetings from the oceans and from the mountains deep down here in South Africa. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you so much for being here. And as a quick fire question, what's one blind spot that boards can have uncovered by working with coaches?
I think a blind spot would be when board members think everyone's aligned, and someone comes in and they present, management will come in and present, and everyone says, "Oh, we're all in alignment, we're all in agreement." And it reminds me of the story of a management consultant, Dr. Jerry Harvey, who spoke about it's called the Abilene Paradox, for those of you who might want to look it up. But essentially, it's a story about one day he's sitting on a deck with his wife and her parents, and it's a very hot day, and they're enjoying a cold lemonade, and there's breeze, a slight breeze, or the fan at least, and they're playing dominoes. And they're kind of just sitting enjoying that. And then out of the blue, her father says, "Why don't we go off to Abilene to a diner there?" And they kind of go, "Yeah, okay, let's all go." And the diner is 85 kilometers. I don't know what that is in miles, but it's a fair distance. So they all get into the car and they drive to the diner, and they drive all the way back, and they settle down back home, and they're sitting there. And after a while, his wife pipes up and says, "Well, was everyone happy with that? We all, that was a nice outing." And the mother-in-law says, "No, it's not. It was so hot and uncomfortable in that car. We should have just stayed here and enjoyed the lemonade." The father-in-law said, "I was just trying to be nice to say perhaps we could all go and do something together." And so what it's reflective of is that sometimes we don't, in the boardroom, people don't want to either voice a disagreement with another person, or they don't want to be seen to be in conflict with the others in the boardroom. Or maybe it's a charismatic board chair or a dominant CEO, and then they don't want to rub up against. So we kind of just go with the flow, that kind of alignment. And there are a variety of reasons and assumptions that are happening as to why, that decision everyone seems to be going along with, even though they didn't particularly want to go out driving on that particular hot day. So Claire, that would be both an example of just assuming there's alignment and a little story to illustrate that. Thank you.
I love it. Thank you, Joy.
Thank you.
And David,
Mm.
we all know you. If you want to introduce briefly, you're very welcome. And then I've got a question for you as well.
Okay, well, before I do, I'm just going to. I've been reading a brilliant book which just picks up on what Joy was saying, and it's just perfect segue because it's called Defy: The Power of No. It's all about how people get pushed into compliance and how you can resist it. And it's a brand new book. It's just out in the last month or this month, and I'm strongly recommend it. It's a great book. So I'm probably have met many of you. I see so many names I know. I'm the old man, the compulsive scribbler, who keeps asking those awkward questions and having a lot of fun doing it. So that's probably the That's probably enough really. I'm looking forward to an assignment that I think is coming up, which we've been having discussions on, about helping a chairman of a board that has been of a company that's been taken over and had a brilliant culture. It got sold off to a big American corporation, which destroyed the culture, and they bought themselves out again. It's quite a large company, or it was bought up by another company. And they're suddenly saying we need to go back to the old culture. And the board has got this problem of this issue of how do you recreate and go back to history. And it's wonderful because it brought back onto the board members who were there 15 years ago when it was at its height. And this is I've never had this issue before, and I'm really looking forward to getting stuck into it. So different kind of scenario. So what's your question, Claire?
So the question here is, what's one thing a chair can do to model coaching leadership?
I suppose the simplest answer is to learn to shut up a bit more.
Mm.
I have a tool which we've introduced to so many boards, which is just helps to have this open conversation. And all it consists of is not letting anybody, we've got a difficult issue to talk about. We don't let anybody say anything for the first 5 minutes. We ask them to sit and reflect, and then we ask them to write down their responses to 3 questions. What do I want to say about this issue? What do I want to hear other people say about this issue? And what do I want us to achieve from this conversation? And then the chair says, well, tell us, what have you written down? So there's no discussion except for somebody asking for more, just a bit of detail. But essentially, no discussion. Everybody speaks up. And the chairperson is the last person to get to say what they've written down. It cuts the time on the conversation by half because everybody knows where everybody else is coming from. It creates valuing each other and listening to each other. And respecting each other by saying, I know that Joy Marie, you had some concerns about this. Are we addressing those? And it means that you're much less likely to have any remaking of the issue of the conversation in the corridor later. Simple tools, shutting up.
Love it. Absolutely perfect. And Sarah, who prepared the questions, she gave me one as well. Some of you won't be surprised at the one she gave me. And it's, if a boardroom had a soundtrack, what song would it be? and so the one I came up with was Memories all alone in the moonlight. The reason it's Memories is because quite often boards stick in the past and not the present and the future enough. And maybe the song it needs to be is, there's one called 4 Seasons in One Day, where there is that challenge and there's the support, just what David and Joy were talking about, really. So that's my songs metaphorically, and we're going to move on to Arn. Would you like to introduce yourself, Arn?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Welcome to everyone. I don't know about you, but I'm still sweating after that intrusion. Holy crow, that was unsettling like anything I've ever had. So I'm a little off kilter. I'm in Calgary, Canada. I am a board coach. I am a board mentor, a board advisor, facilitator, whatever the board needs to achieve its objective, whatever it decides it is. I help them hold the space and have those difficult conversations in a psychologically safe environment so that they can look at the issue, hold the tension, and get to an answer that, or let's say a decision that is good for them. That's what I help with. So that's me in a nutshell. And I've also posted my LinkedIn, link on in the chat. Please feel free to connect or follow me, and I follow back and connect back. Looking forward to creating more of a dialogue on how to coach boards.
Wonderful. And for your question, on which fictional character would make an inclusive board member and why?
You know, I giggled at that one when I got it, because from my perspective, I watch TV shows differently than people do. I think other people do. I'm always looking for the relationships, the cause and effect, how complex it is. And from my perspective, Mon Mothma, from the Star Wars universe, who's a main character in Andor and Rogue One, because she doesn't chase heroics. She sees systems for what they are: entrenched, self-serving, often performative, and manages to play inside them while subverting their worst tendencies. She knows the difference between governance and theater, which I really like. She governs under pressure, not from a playbook, but from principle, which I think is very important as well. And she absorbs paradoxes, creates certainty for coherence, and takes the long view even when it costs her personally. And I think that's pretty rare, and it's instructive. She also doesn't default to the noise. When others posture, she asks real questions. What are we becoming? And when the answer is uncomfortable, she doesn't flinch or delegate it to compliance or another committee. And I think she also stewards risk the way directors should. She holds space for them, and for the consequences, not outsourcing it to process. And she never confuses a dashboard with due diligence or a briefing with understanding. So that's why I think she's amazing. And she sets the terms for what is necessary. So it's the kind of director you need. Someone who can hold the space, someone who's comfortable in the tension, and that's why I think she'd be ideal. And that's why I giggled, because it was the first person who came to my mind.
Brilliant. Thank you. I love the detailed description as well. It's really, yeah, it's caught my imagination there.
Well, I just went with it. I said, okay, this is a creative exercise. I'm not a creative person. Let's see where it goes. And what lessons was I taking from that TV series, and in terms of how to lead in such a complex, ever-evolving environment, which many boards and directors confront on a daily basis.
Absolutely. Thanks, Arne. And so moving on to Dummy. Dummy, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Unmute first and breathe again. Violation, personal attack, and same with you. Yeah, it feels like someone just, yeah. We'll not give energy to that. We'll move on. We're here now, and yeah. Thank you, Claire. My name is Dumisani, which means give praise and honor those you meet with the gifts that were placed in you. Yeah, and my grandmother's fault, I'm a coach. Yeah, and I consider myself a radical human connector. I'll say that again. Radical human connection is my currency. I work with boards, I work on boards, I serve on boards, I coach boards and board members and executives, and I teach coaching, work with incredible souls like David, people like Craig here, Martin, see Martin, Susan, and many others here, and I've known Joy Marie for a long time, and so glad that you're here. Thank you, Joy. And Claire, what you do and what you're doing. For me, it's understanding that we are actually kindred spirit, all of us. And that's the work that I do. And being able to do what you love and sometimes get paid for it, it's quite fun. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'm a coach, and I'm human.
Thank you. And I'm sort of feeling you might have answered this already. However, if you had a superpower that you can use with boards, what would it be and why?
Yeah, open their eyes, open their freaking eyes, have them see each other. I mean, board members that are, yeah, and you would know this, extensive experience in boards, and Joy Marie. It's one of the things for me. It's board members that are acting or playing roles like they're on stage. It's about understanding that you are serving. You got to play your part. It's a service role. You're not there for yourself. If I had a superpower, I would help them feel very uncomfortable whenever they even lean towards self-service. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. And so where we're going next is to board coaching scenarios. And we've got some that we put together, but we'd really love to throw it out to the whole room here. If anyone's got one that they've worked with, they're working with, or they think, I bet that will happen, would anyone like to share a scenario, and together we'll grapple with what ways coaches can enable boards to be at their best when such things happen?
Could I make sorry, Claire, may I make a general comment while we give people perhaps the time to think?
Absolutely.
So I just wanted to, if I could, make an observation around some of the insights just shared from the panel as well. And just to give it a bit of context, because certainly when coaching board members, it's the context of the boardroom that also weighs into the kind of dilemmas and scenarios we're talking about here. It's not a coffee chat. It's not a book club meeting. There are very stringent and different jurisdictions, compliance and legal perspectives that need to be taken into account. And that can sometimes both stifle how individuals in the boardroom, show up, speak up, bring themselves across. But at the same time, decisions need to be made, because that's, the boardroom needs to make decisions, organizations need to move on. And certainly working for coaches who want to work in this particular space is also helping the directors and boards to find and understand those board processes that enable that environment where they can show up and have these robust conversations, but allow for different perspectives to come in. So certainly, when David gave the suggestion of, just shut up or listen, another way of framing that I do as well is you ask people, can we have a round of clarifying questions? Because it can become very antagonistic and people want, let's just try and find all the holes in management's response. So it's first like, let's have a round. So again, supporting that. And then following that up with, okay, now what are the questions? What assumptions do we need to test? Or, what do we want to challenge management about? With a sense of professionalism in doing that. So, it's not just let's try and find all the gaps or the problems, but it's also about, how can we be skeptical, but in a professional way about that as well. And then certainly I love that in terms of the person, the Monthmo, is the capacity of people to hold the space of listening to different and opposing views, because the boardroom can be a very contentious space, particularly when you have different stakeholders who are pushing particular agendas or trying to bring mandates across. And just having that capacity to listen to different perspectives, to hold that space, and to be uncomfortable, being comfortable in that uncomfortable space. So again, your character in doing all of that. And in Dumi, yes, that radical human connections of opening your eyes is the reminder to all of us that, the decisions that are made in the boardroom impact people. They impact people, they impact our planet. So let's open our eyes that we're doing this to and for human beings. And we cannot lose sight of the impact of the conversations, the decisions, the debates that we are having in that particular boardroom. So the different scenarios, certainly we could explore and we can listen to the audience about that. But it's important to hold it in the context that these boards are required by law, by compliance, by regulators to come to decisions. And we hold all of this together at the same time. Thank you.
Thank you, Joy. And I've just seen Mike's question in the chat. How do we deal with board work when there's different power differentials. Joy, I'm also thinking something we talked about on email briefly, and it was a scenario when you were talking about members being given voice. Do you want to share that?
Yeah, so the scenarios where, so sometimes it can vary from I mean, there's layers to this as well. So giving voice in the sense of, there's one board where working with this particular board, they sat in order in the boardroom on order in which they arrived in the boardroom, right? So when they first got appointed onto the board to the most recent, I mean, they sat physically in the row in that. I mean, you can imagine that culture in that particular boardroom where somebody, and you can imagine the color lines and the gender and all of that complexity that comes into it. Then we add the layer of culture into that as well. Where do you find your voice when the layer of culture comes in? Then you add the layer of patriarchy into that as well. Then you add the layer of, well, you're sitting there as board members and one of them says, I'm the CEO of a much bigger institution than this particular board I'm sitting on, and we bring this. And then there's somebody who's perhaps relatively new into the boardroom in a particular area of, let's say, they understand cybersecurity or cyber incidents, but they don't have as many years of board experience. Or there's someone sitting there who's perhaps has a thought, has a very pertinent question to ask, but is watching the dynamics of what's happening in the boardroom and just not finding that spaciousness, or what you want to label with confidence or opportunity to speak up. And so it comes down also to, you can work at the individual level. We can also work at the board level to say, what are some of those frameworks that we need to be considering when we notice that some people are not speaking up? I mean, in this particular space, there are concepts. Have you ever heard of social loafing? I mean, for those of you in academia will know about social, you find social loafing happening in the boardroom as well. It's a concept where, they're talking about it, I'm not going to add my voice. I kind of agree what Dumi's saying. Why must I say anything else? So you just kind of loaf, you like hang back kind of thing. Or, was it David Kahneman and I've forgotten his other one's name. They spoke about, sometimes board members overemphasize, that, we've got this, when they underestimate the costs, they underestimate the risks because they, feel that they've got this covered. So, finding the space to work with boards, to work with individuals to say, how do you bring your voice into the room? And there are ways of doing that. So good and strong board chairs, but also having confident, courageous fellow board directors that can hold that balance of power, can say, gosh, I haven't heard On say anything in the last, what is On think about this? Or, David, maybe you're talking too much right now. Let's give Claire a chance to share perspective on something. So we need to be in that boardroom calling out those kinds of behaviors and having the courage to be able to do that. Thanks, Claire.
Thank you. You made me also think there a board I was working with and the conversations that were happening in the break over coffee were the conversations that needed to be happening in the room. So it's encouraging them to, take the ownership and responsibility for bringing those conversations up as well. Thank you. Anyone else wish to share around the power differentials? Could spend 3 hours on this one alone.
And maybe a quick one around power differentials. First, really, this is a moving target around power. Sometimes, depending on who is on the board and who sponsored, promoted them to be on that particular board, power sometimes may not be aware that that one is powerful because they have this team or organization, stakeholders behind them in that. One board I served in some time back was recognizing that the board members would discuss something and always yield to someone who was not an officer of any kind on the board, not chair, not board committee chair or anything, just a board member, director sitting there taking care of the stakeholders' interests or shareholders' interests. Everyone would defer to that board member and sitting in and listening in, supporting the board, more on this more advisory and a bit of coaching in there, but listening in and being brought into test and check the dynamics. The power was clearly in this individual board member. The chair was there, even the chairperson of that board would check. And so, Mr. Sorensen, what do you think? Almost every time. And I didn't know that what was going on until I to investigate and find out what really was going on. And only realizing that they represented and had been seconded to the board by the major partners, parties, shareholders in that were really running the business. Game of it's a checkmate there for the board, for that board. But yeah, David.
I love that example, and it's a classic case where nobody talks about the power differentials. Now, boards don't talk about power or status or rank. It's almost a taboo topic. And the only person who can typically enable them to be open and frank and talk about power issues is a coach. And just bringing the topic into the room. Wow, hell, where does the power lie in this? If you take a large bowl of sweets and put them on the middle of the table and say, dole them out. Who gets the biggest pile of sweets and who gets the smallest little group of sweets? Just look at it visually in terms of power, and what needs to happen for this board to be its most effective in the context of all this power that's being exerted. How do the people who have most power empower other people, or give some of that power to other people around the table by by actually asking them for their opinion? It's typically the chairperson who has to say, "Oh, Claire, you haven't spoken for a while. What do you think?" When we see a board that's really functioning well, everybody might actually say, "Yeah, Claire, I'm really interested in your opinion on this." Then we know that board is actually a listening board rather than a talking shop.
Thank you.
And sorry, Claire, I was add as well to say that it's a good practice as well to help chairs not voice their opinions first, because the power differential there is already strong, and often they can use their position to sway conversations, whereas to hold back, David explained it earlier as well, but I also do that. Let everyone else speak and then. And the other tip that I also have, I mean, if any of you were to sit on a board with me, is people will go, "Oh, for the reasons that, David explained, that's the reason why I would support it," or Dumi articulated my view that, and I'd go, no, we all come with diverse perspectives and views and understandings. What are your specific reasons for agreeing with this decision? Because that's the benefit, how the organization can be strengthened, because they're listening to the different reasons why they would support or not. But this, because they said it so nicely, I don't buy that necessarily. Thanks.
Can I come in with a humorous observation at this point, as I'm wont to do? It turns out from study of physiology, it turns out that there are two human inventions which have done most damage to people's health over the centuries. One of them is shoes. That actually, the wearing of shoes that actually dulls your feet and causes all sorts of problems. And you wouldn't have corns and all those kinds of things if in more primitive societies. And the other is the chair. Human bodies are not designed to sit in chairs. It's why we have backache and all these other problems. So actually, the chair, while it's something that can be very comfortable, is actually something that can be very harmful as well. And I think just putting the chair into perspective, chairs are what give you backache if you're not careful, if they're not applied right. So an interesting tangential observation.
It makes me think so much about if we could enable board chairs to have coach training, you know, to really tap into what they're noticing in the relational system as the meetings are going on, as a fly in the wall. That would be fabulous. I'm also thinking of one board that I was with a co-coach, and we were encouraging them to have a rolling chair position just to diffuse the power differentials a little bit. And also, like we said, to step back and listen as opposed to, you know, giving the opinion. Mike, do you want to speak out in terms of your last comment?
Well, if I may, if you don't mind, I'm more about, it's okay, I get it. I know I work with boards myself, so I understand all about the power differentials and that kind of stuff, you know. So you're just telling me stuff I know. Tell me something I don't know. What do you do to kind of, the days of the unique supreme being as being the leader are done. We now live in a 24/7 environment, so a team would have to have multiple bosses in order to complete the 24-hour cycles and that. So we know where we are. But what the question I'm asking is that within the boards where you're working and that sort of thing, because you guys probably got more experience than I have, what are the things that you say to the dictator, to the guy who has that power, the supreme being, whatever Arn would term it as being, as Darth Vader, perhaps? I don't know.
Can I jump? Okay, on. I'll jump in as well later.
Thank you, Joy. Marie. You know, it depends on the context. There's so many things that I start going through in terms of, you've got this very dominant personality in the boardroom. One example is I work for the chairman of the board of Qatar Petroleum, and he would always make sure that everyone at the table spoke first. But then he would give his decision, and everybody would change their decision to be in alignment with him. So it was performance, you know, and then trying to get, and I still refer to him as HE because he's a great individual. It was like, well, are you happy with that answer? And he looked and he'd never thought of it. So I think maybe it's just holding up the mirror and going, are you happy with that answer? Does that serve your purpose? I think there's, and it can be done so gently. And then sometimes, you know, it's a conversation you have to have over and over again, you know, with the chair, whoever that may be. And I've found that it doesn't depend on gender. There are these roles that people assume. I've got to be the person in charge. And it's just holding up a mirror saying, hey, usually for a cup of coffee afterwards, you know, how did you feel about that meeting? How did it go well? And then, oh, it went really well, and this. And I said, well, let's pull 30,000 feet back. Let's take the position of a director. How did that work for you? Or how would that work for you had you been in that position? So a lot of it is just opening, you know, holding up a mirror and holding a conversation so that they can, you know, a reflective, co-generative conversation. And you also have to be brave as a coach. I think sometimes you have to say, well, you know, what I saw in that boardroom did not translate into what you're thinking. And that's part of the challenge. You have to be firm as a let's say mentor, advisor, coach to a chair. You cannot be, oh, okay, interesting. You know, I'm sorry, I'm going to hold you right there. Is that really the case? And I think that's one of the things why I say coach, mentor, advisor, because it sort of absolves me from being a pure coach. It allows me then to take the role, put on the hat to serve that chairperson. And then if you offer it and they go with it, great. If they don't, be brave, be courageous, continue pursuing that line of questioning if you sense that the board's not working well. So there's so many things that come to mind, Michael, you know, or Mike. There's just not one sort of like cookie cutter approach. It's really context based. What is the system you're in? What are the personalities? What is the the governance structure? And that's one thing I would encourage coaches to do is seek, you know, can I get your corporate governance manual? Get an understanding of the system. Get an understanding of the personalities. Look at their bios. Take time to speak with the directors as well, and ask, you know, so what's one thing that's never said in a meeting that you wish was brought up, you know? And then I always use Chatham House rules so that I can bring up these points without putting anyone on the spot, because many people are not comfortable with a role as a director or a chair. and they don't want to be singled out for, you know, potentially naive questions or questions that could be interpreted to challenge the current power structure. So it's really difficult, to be honest. And sometimes you win, and sometimes you lose, you know, but you have to be courageous. And as long as the intent there is to serve the chair, the board, the organization, I don't think you can go wrong by following your gut instinct.
Joy.
Yeah, I mean, so on beautiful. I would concur with all of those, and I mean, I'd say to Michael as well. Again, echoing its context, I have a couple of things that I also just keep in the back pocket, so to speak, because again, how to respond, which hat do I wear? So a couple of things also just off the top is sometimes good boards will have a board charter, and then these personalities say, shouldn't we be revisiting our charter to understand how did we agree we would conduct ourselves and hold each other to account, and that can bring it in. Or boards will have maybe a code of ethics, and perhaps the conduct of a particular, the chair or someone is not abiding. Perhaps, you know, colleagues, this is an opportunity for us to revisit and revise and look at that kind of behavior. You can do a thing like a board evaluation. You can do a self-evaluation. Good boards could also say at the end of their board meeting, what worked well for us in this board meeting? What could we do differently? And either raise it or send it in a note to the COSEC or to the board chair if it's been very heated. But it's a lovely reflective space also to create spaciousness for people to say, well, you know, earlier in the meeting when we were talking and people got a bit hot under the collar and things were going awry, perhaps we can, you know, handle that differently and that kind of thing. To also, sometimes you're going to have to match that energy or pick it up with, if it is, a particular board director or the chairperson of the board, pulling them aside. As you know, Ann said, I could do that. Or sometimes we actually have to do it in the meeting and just call out that behavior and say, quite frankly, that behavior is unacceptable, Mr. Chair, and perhaps we need to just step away and get a coffee break, or just to kind of shift the energy flows in the board meeting as well. And then sometimes I would also support board directors to ask the questions like, you know, what question are we not asking that we should be asking? Or what conversations are we not having that we should be having about, you know, how we are conducting ourselves in this particular environment as well. So it's a range of different responses. I also, again, if I wear my different hat, I'll say, okay, with a legal hat on, do we understand the legal implications if we follow this? Because we need to be able to explain to the courts, to our shareholders, our stakeholders, because we're all going to be wearing orange jumpsuits if we don't. Or I'll put on a governance hat and say, gosh, when we say we're acting in the best interest and we have some strong voices in the room, are we all clear about what it means to be acting in the best interest? And perhaps we just need to take a pause and for each of us to go around the room and say, what does that mean in this particular context? Or I'll put on a hat that says, gosh, as a coach, I'm feeling a lot of energy right now. You know, if we were to just step back, and then you bring a coaching perspective into it as well. So it's going to depend on the context and what we have in our toolboxes at that time when working with the dynamic in the boardroom. Thank you.
Thanks, Joy Marie. And a few things that I've used is I love Barry Oshery's work called Toots, taking time out of time. So just pausing the meeting. What are you noticing in terms of the way you're communicating together? And see if we can draw it from them, you know, that giving them space for that awareness. Sounds a bit 1980s, not necessarily a tennis ball, but pass it round and everyone has their time to speak, Nancy Klein style. Whether they do or not is their choice, or doing that in a constellation when that's possible. So people can even show their view on a certain statement, even in silence, because if they're moving towards or away from it, it can actually still uncover their opinion. Love what you've said, Joy, around, you know, the values and what way we're living the values, a little sort of retrospective at the end of the board meeting in terms of process, what worked, what didn't, hoping people will share in that way. And also, I'm I'm just thinking with one board director, some of the one-on-one work went quite transpersonal. What do you want for our world, and what way is this way that you're leading impacting that? A little bit existential as well, really.
Can I come in for a second?
Please do.
If we go in to, if we're working with any board and we take the view that if you get fired for doing the right thing, it's okay. So it allows us to be a little bit more adventurous sometimes, and to say to the chairperson, let's have a little thought experiment. If you think of two extremes of leadership style, let's take Nelson Mandela and Idi Amin. What are the characteristics that you would see that would be, what are the critical differences between their leadership style? And where do you think you are between those two? Where would you put yourself on this spectrum? Then that's fine, that's good. Where do you think you ought to be? Is it the same, or do you think there's some room for movement? And where do you think other members of the board would put you? We're now starting to open up a conversation. And of course, they've got the courage to actually go and ask other members of the team. We may get some interesting feedback. But I think looking at it not in absolute terms, but looking at it as a spectrum. And people can often move along a spectrum, and it's easier for them to do that than to be challenged on specific behaviors. So they come to the realization of where they want to be seen, and then it opens up the opportunities for them to be coached or helped to move to that position where they want to be seen. Don't know if that works for you, Michael. Good. It's always good to go in the attitude, I'm going to get fired tomorrow for doing what I should do.
Thank you.
I 100% agree, David. Be true to yourself. And if they don't like your approach, then maybe the fit's not there. And none of us want to say goodbye to a client. But yet on the other hand, I want to sleep at night. I don't want to be made, face my maker one day and go, well, why didn't you do that? Because I really wanted the money. But I understand there are economic issues at play. But then also, I think what I'm getting from Joy, David, and Claire is that it's creativity. Be as creative as you feel is necessary to serve the client and the directors and the chair and the organization. Because I think that's part of the challenge with boards, is that they're so used to these scripts. I follow the agenda, we have this discussion, then we do this. And I think sometimes it's just good to crack the system a bit, gently or firmly, so that they can feel comfortable being themselves, because that's why they were hired as a director, because they brought a unique skill set. So don't adapt to the system. Have the system in a way interact with them, so it becomes part of, let's say this holding the space, this stew pot of everybody working together. That's I find this so inspiring, because it reinforces in my mind that creativity, and that's what makes coaches so, I think, effective in a boardroom. It's like, how can I see this issue? How do I go around it? Like David said, anonymity is good. Let's say a spectrum of behavior is good, rather than putting people on the spot.
Yeah,
that's what really resonates for me.
I love that. Claire, can I come in there? Because
Sure.
I need to hop off. I love what you said on, as you're saying, I should have come before him, because you wrap it up very nicely. I like what you said, David, Joy Murray, and Claire. For me, it's about, I love the part, be authentic, be real, be genuine. Yes, clear conscience is one, but it's serving the board. You're there for something, whether you're paid or not. Are you making an impact? Are you making a difference? Or are you just coasting or affirming them to keep doing what they do? So I love what you're saying there on. For me, I look at it sometimes as a dance. Sometimes I don't know the music and I don't know the steps. So I can step back and watch and observe and maybe try to dance with them. And maybe introduce something to the dance and see if they can dance along. Some board members hide behind the Chatham House rules. And some hide behind, in South Africa, Joy Marie, you can speak to this when I jump off, King 4. Some of these rules are meant to guide and support. These are board rules. They're there to ensure governance. And I love your question, Michael. How do we ensure that those rules are adjustable, adaptable enough to serve the purpose of that board? And that's a tough question for some board members who want things to be done this way or no other way. But yeah. Claire.
So, Dummy, I know you've got to dip off now. We've really appreciated your leadership today earlier in the call. Thank you for stepping in there. That great leadership. And we will connect again soon and we can send you the rest of the recording as well.
Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the session.
Thanks,
Thank
Dummy.
you.
Can we hear from Michael?
Yeah.
I'd love to hear Michael's summation of all of this.
Okay, so thank you for that. Some interesting stuff came through. I loved your concept there of introducing a spectrum, and I think that's probably a technique I've never used, but I think I will have to look at ways of going forward with that. So I thank you for that. I think what Arne said, and also what Joyce said, there's some interesting stuff there about, you know, I work in the Middle East, so a lot of the time I come up against family kind of conclaves, as you might call them, businesses, and it's very difficult sometimes with the power. You know, there's a real patriarchal kind of aspect to the way the board is run. And it's very much about, if father's not happy, then the rest of the kids are all running around trying to be supportive in whatever way. And calling that out is, as Arne pointed out, is actually usually the you get that lonely walk back to the changing room. But that's just the way it is. But I agree with you. It's just that you have to kind of take it as being, you know, my head is, my conscience is clear at the end of the day. I did my best to serve the board, or whatever. So thank you anyway. Yes.
Thank you. Anyone else in the audience like to share anything at this point? Well, I'm going to throw in the chat a little scenario that was created just with a little few tweaks when myself and Sarah were looking at different scenarios. One around bad behavior, really. So see what you think about that one. I suppose the best question is, as a coach in that moment, what way would you handle it?
Please don't be shy. I'm curious, because this I've actually confronted this, and it was a source of great consternation. So I would love to hear how, you know, my everybody on this forum would you know, would like to respond, or how they would go about it, the strategy.
And it's real, isn't it, Arne?
More often than we think, than we know, I believe.
Yeah.
Mitra, don't feel pressurized. You've written in the chat, I would follow up privately. Follow up privately because?
Well, it
Would you like
depends
to
on,
share?
yeah, it depends on I'll put my camera on. Sorry, I had it off from earlier.
Thank you.
Wonderful panel. I'm so appreciative of everyone's input. Hi Arne, hi David, hi Claire, Joy, Craig's still on, Michael. The reason that I said privately, Dr. Claire, is because based upon the culture, it might be seen as too like off-putting or pushing in if you like come to the person in front of other people. like I find like I'm mixed race, and so I find that depending upon the race that I'm or the culture that I'm speaking to, so long as I come to the person in a respectful manner and I voice the concern that I have, it's like I I don't have as much pushback if I explain it in a way that I'm not trying to like usurp power or anything. It's more that this is a concern that I'm seeing, you know, or like in how they in how they say that. Like for this, they may, if I set it out in a public setting, they may feel that I'm calling them out too publicly. And so, and now I don't know how much of, as I'm reflecting, as I'm speaking, I don't know how much of my answer is my personal preference in doing this and how much I feel would be cultural. But for me, I can honestly say that if it's something, I always, you know, applaud in public. And then if there's something that privately needs to be said, then I do that in a private setting. That's how I've operated for the most part. If I feel, and this being a politically unstable country, and then the comment that's being made, I would feel more comfortable following up in a private scenario. But I do think it's important to follow up, and then the ethical boundaries. I need more time to reflect on that because I think that it could go either way. So I'll pause here for other people to let you speak. And thank you for the question.
Isn't this one a fantastic topic for supervision? And similar situation in one supervision session with a team coach. They were concerned about their reputation, and that's why they weren't being as brave as they wanted and needed to be. But it's a tricky one. Anyone else? Michael?
So I just wanted to follow up with the bit in private pieces that I went to Sandhurst as a youngster before I went into, well, I was in the army, but the best piece of advice I got early on was from a guy called Captain David Burton, and he taught me PIBRIP. And I don't know if you've all heard of it, but PIBRIP, praise in public and reprimand in private. So it's kind of just the way you do it. You take somebody to one side and you talk to them quietly about any behavior that you think is perhaps a little bit reprehensible.
Let's Craig go first. Yes.
I'm a bit, I don't know, I'm conflicted. I think whilst I understand the logic, taking the conversation out of the space, we're taking the responsibility onto us, and we could be considered to be back channeling because we're not doing it in a transparent way with others. Whereas actually by offering it back and saying, oh, I'm noticing some different reactions to that statement. Let's just take a time out for a second. I'd just like to make space for anything to be discussed that people may be feeling, but that perhaps there's some reservations around. So I want to give it back to them. I don't want to make it about me.
So I've got
Craig, I see the value in what you're saying. I have to agree with that too. There is value on the other side of having that conversation together as a whole.
So I've got two observations from two different perspectives. One is that age-old question: if we were having this conversation in public rather than private, would it be different? So that's the ethical dimension. But then there's also a procedural dimension. And while not quite as bad as this, when I've had a situation where I felt that it might be ethically dodgy, what does your risk register say about this? And to which we respond, well, we haven't got a risk register that deals with these kinds of things. Well, okay, so shouldn't you, given such a sensitive topic, should you not subject this to the risk, to a risk analysis, which of course would include reputational risk? So if this all goes belly up, what is the likely reputational cost of that? And it's not that we're trying to tell them to change their decision, but making sure they're making the decision with clarity.
Thank you. Arne.
I love this. I really do. I think, David, though, you're now entering into an area of being more of a mentor / consultant advisor than necessarily a coach. And I think, from my perspective, that's the way because those kind of questions. But fundamentally, for me, it goes back to how I contracted with the client in the first place, with that board. And I am very clear that I say, if I hear of anything that is, ethically challenging, how do you want me to approach that? So I seek prior permission from the chair and the board, because part of the challenge is not being a lawyer. I could be asked to testify, as a result, saying, Mr. Wenekers, you were there when that, we see from the minutes of the meeting, you were there at the conversation. So, and what happened from your perspective? So it's a really dodgy thing. But for me, I create safety for myself by saying, establishing the context of when something unethical happens. What do I do when I see behavior that is not in line with their code of conduct? How do I call that out? Because I want to be very careful. Maybe the board doesn't care about, maybe it's a publicly traded board and there's somebody with 51% of the ownership and they're going to steamroll and everybody else is just there to, have their objections noted and move on. So again, context sensitive, but make sure that you think about, ethical, what could be the problem? And I didn't mean to challenge you directly, but David, it just seemed to me it's like you're being more of a consultant / mentor, but that's the thing about being a board coach. You have to wear these hats. So
and does the client care a bit what label you're giving yourself?
Yeah. Very good point.
I'm thinking as well, one CEO I was working with, so it wasn't board, it was the senior team. And I asked specifically, is it okay to challenge you in front of your directors? Yeah, sure. Yeah. Obviously with explanation. And then I said, is it really okay for me to challenge you? And there was a yes, but more thinking behind it. So I just found that really interesting as well. Joy.
Claire, so thanks. I mean, I had my hand up and I think I'm going to do the very thing I said people shouldn't do. Arne spoke beautifully about it. But a couple of things. I mean, you asked specifically if you're a coach in that particular situation, because, depending on how it was contracted, we're not the ethics officer, as I think someone else has said, to point out these things. But we can draw the observation. I'm observing there seems to be I'm noticing this. Should we just take a moment to explore what we are noticing? And if they're not comfortable, do you just want to write it down and send it to me and I can, read it out? We could just try and, surface some of those perspectives. But absolutely, depending on how am I there with a legal hat on, a compliance hat, a governance hat, a coach hat, a bit of all of that, a bit of the mentoring, because again, context dependent, there will be huge risks if, but you're there in an advisory capacity or you're there as a coach capacity and, we're making decisions or you're having conversations which will have consequences to it. So understanding that, but for me, it felt like a bit of a neutral way is to say, I've just observed or I'm noticing that there seems to be some shifts about that last statement. Do we want to explore that in more detail? Thanks.
Love it. And then just in terms of our process, we didn't move to breakouts. Are we all okay seeing if there's any other scenarios? And I've got a few others that we've got. Should we want to discuss those? How do you think we should proceed?
I'm really enjoying the conversation as it's structured now, but I'm very open to moving to breakout rooms. It allows for, I think, a really rich conversation to unfold and exploration.
Should we do a vote? Show of hands. Put your hand up for breakout, leave it down to stay here. I'm sort of feeling, Benita, that larger groups working as well.
Yeah, I think a larger group's much better.
Yeah. And no hands have gone up, so we'll stay here. I'm going to throw this one in there. When the chair of the board shares with the coach afterwards that they feel they're not being listened to, heard, they're losing their power because of the coaching. Where would we go with that?
See, in some ways that comes back to what I said, which was that sometimes because you're asking the question openly in front of the board, their power regime gets threatened because they feel that there's somebody in the room challenging them to kind of speak in a different way, or you know, they're not happy with the answers that they're giving. So it kind of sorry, you just underlined what I was kind of where I was going earlier.
Anyone else any thoughts on that?
If I relate it to team coaching, the coach and the team leader need to form a partnership. So the question in my mind is that just the same with the chair and the team coach or the coach?
Anyone any thoughts?
Does that not come back to Arne's point about contracting though? Because you're contracted to, are you contracted to coach the chairman, or are you contracted to coach the board? If it's a board, then it's a team. If it's an individual, then you're contracted to actually deal with that individual. So I think that's a contracting kind of piece.
Can we clarify what we mean by contracting? Because there's this the big, you know, this is what I'm here to do, but equally there's contracting that goes on all the time. You're constantly contracting with the team or the board that you're working with. You're with everybody. So I'm not quite sure, Michael, which contract are we talking about?
So I can only go on my experience, which is probably different to yours and Arne's and Benita's and Joe's, and the kind of I usually end up trying to, or being asked to go in and deal with a particular individual who may be being disruptive in a board or whatever it is, or they feel is not performing quite as strongly as he could do, whatever it is. So I normally, personally, I go into contracting with a specific individual, and there's an HR element. So there's that kind of the eternal triangle pattern that we do. Sometimes part of that is that I will go and watch how they perform in the meeting. And I'm introduced to the meeting as the fly on the wall that will sit there, and I will make observations, obviously, you know, later and that sort of thing. So that's kind of where my position is at the moment. I do coach teams as well, but they tend to be not at a board level. They tend to be at a slightly lower level, doing, you know, scrum coaching and sort of stuff like that.
Can I make a comment on this part as well? So part of, and also the research that I'm busy doing as well, is we talk about boards, and there are some boards. I mean, I sit on a board where we meet twice a year, and I sit on another board where we meet at least 4 times, if not 6 times a year. And it varies. And, you know, are boards teams? Are they groups? Are they productive units? You know, that complete conversation. And part of the challenge with the boardroom dynamic is that if you're meeting twice a year or even 3 times a year, the level of personal engagement, the level of, you know, understanding one another is shifting. And a lot of the academic research, because they see the boardroom as a bit of a black box, you know, if you're going to have somebody sitting there observing what's happening, you know, can we really be our authentic selves because somebody's sitting there with a pen and paper and observing us? And actually, you know, some of the other thinking is you could have board members who've got the years of experience and they've got the academic qualifications, and then they come into a board meeting and a particular meeting, and they got up on the wrong side of the bed, or their child is sick, or they're social loafing because they're distracted with the news that's happening. And so they're not bringing their effective self into that particular meeting. So the dynamic of observation there is, how do we work with board directors and the board processes? So yes, they come in with their skills and knowledge and expertise, but how are they bringing that into a meeting when it counts and having the conversation about the decision? And so, having evidence of how boards are able to engage effectively towards making decisions and using those different boardroom competencies to be able to do that is in the field of study that's still, we could do a lot more research and evidence-based in that. Interestingly enough, in the South African context, for board directors there, they have to, if you belong to the professional body, which is the Institute of Directors, they've got a board directors competency framework. And there are 30 of them, 15 technical and 15 sort of social and social competencies, for lack of a terrible word right now. Whereas in other jurisdictions, and they're common things like, acting in the best interest, making sure you're applying your mind and you acting honestly for the organization. There can similarities of those competencies, but it comes back to, in the moments when they're making the decisions, how are the board directors using those processes, using those skills, using that dynamic? Is the chair allowing for conversations, for disagreements, for that kind of thing in difference? So it's not like there's this unicorn board director and we can coach them if they, tick these boxes, then apply this coaching framework and you'll get a great decision out of them. Thanks.
That's really an emergent issue, isn't it? When the chair feels that, because I think that's difficult to contract for, and I'm going to put that into my, my sort of checklist of things to, to be careful to mention. And that's a difficult one, because to me, it's what's the context, what's the system, what are the players, what's the politics, or the power situation, and really, perhaps it's a one-on-one coaching / exploratory session with the chair. That's in addition to what you're providing to the board. That's a tough one. But then maybe, and then diagnosing that, trying to get to the root of it. What's the cause? Where's the perception coming from? I mean, that in itself is a topic for a lot of study, and it's a hard one to answer, be frank.
Can I just ask, Claire, what is the context of this? Because, if it's like in my environment, if it's a family member, they're an old guy or whatever it is, and they feel it's time for them to move on, then maybe that they'd be quite accepting of the fact that the coaching is seen to be eroding their power base. I don't know. But at the same time, is that if this is coming up as being, you're threatening my power base, then, so yeah, I think Arne was right. There's a lot to do with the actual the context that it's in.
So that one was actually in not-for-profit, and there was quite a lot of toxic behaviour. That not-for-profit works in different countries and is basically raising money for actually coaching of people with certain illnesses.
And the one thing from my perspective that I often struggle with is that I can build a picture to the best of my abilities, but I'm still not going to understand completely everything. And I think that's where this emergence comes from, and then having the conversation that's ongoing and recognizing that perhaps for that chair, it's a journey, of what kind of skills do you have? How are you presenting yourself? There's so much that comes to play, but fundamentally, I hear that as a real cry for help and support. And I would start out by saying, "Wow, what a courageous thing to say," and then just have a conversation and see where it goes. It's really tough, and that pulls to my heartstrings. It's like, oh my gosh, you feel now you're being undermined, or that you're not having the impact, and because of me, not because of me, but because of the presence. How do we tackle that? Like, what a conundrum. Very cool.
So quick, interesting one before we draw everything together. Some people are very opinionated in terms of if a coach or coaches are coaching the board, then they shouldn't do individual coaching with, for example, the chair. It should be a different coach. What do people think about that? I know what I think.
Why don't you tell us what you think?
I honestly think with good contracting, it is absolutely fine.
Yes.
Anyone disagree? And it can almost be an advantage because you're observing them with their people and then working with them on their own as well.
I guess I'm back to my transparency thing. Would I tell everybody that I was also in a relationship with that individual one-to-one?
I would.
But wouldn't it be an upfront contracting? You're coaching the board, and if any of the board members want to have one-on-one coaching, that would be part of the coaching contracting.
Yeah.
So it's not secretive on the side, kind of thing.
But I think you'd also add as part of when you're introducing yourself to the board, you would say is that you are, you from a contracting point of view, you'd say, yes, and I'm looking after these people as well, or I'm involved in them or whatever. So it's clear.
How would you manage your biases though? About like the board and then individually? And that's where I'm stuck at.
Ensuring that you don't collude.
Yeah. There's the same problem everywhere, all the time, though. You're going to come into things with biases. Whose story do you listen to? Yeah. So I think it's no different from any other relationship. But I think there is a different dimension here that's I've only really become aware of in the last year or two, and that is that sometimes as the coach, you may be coaching either the chairman or the chief executive separately. You may be coaching the whole team together, but coaching the chairman and the chief executive as a mini team is a whole area that hadn't occurred to me until a couple of years ago. And the value of enabling them to develop a real teamwork. And that's linked to the two different aspects of leadership, the chief and the shaman. So if one of them is the chief and the other is the shaman, actually, how do you help them to the tensions that come from those two interwoven relationships?
Thanks, David. And I'm just looking at the time here. If you'd like to type in the chat, I'll make sure that that's saved and the little pieces there are captured and shared with everyone. Or if you'd like to speak out, what has your biggest learning been from this session? And also, what more do you want or need to learn around board coaching? Feel free to come off mute and share.
I'm just conscious that I've kind of been quite vocal during this, and I appreciate and grateful and thank you for allowing me to do that. Just really what I want to record it is for next time, can we talk about AI in the boardroom, and how they're using it, how it's utilized? Is it utilized in coaching? I just think it's a very rich area, and it's something that I'm seeing more and more of. So please.
Noted. Anyone else? Knowing different situations and different views has been useful. Biggest learning the real importance of thought and ongoing contracting. Useful session, Dummy's words at the beginning. It's a service role.
Yeah.
Yeah, in service of who? For what purpose? seeing board patterns and challenges in a new light, the importance of contracting and challenging it all through the coaching journey. Panel, let's go round quick just to close. Arne, closing thoughts.
This session has reinforced the fact that I think I know a lot, but I'm always challenged that I don't know as much as I think I do. And it just really reinforces the fact that I always need to keep an open mind, always need to be curious, and always need to think about the gifts that are being presented and trying to, incorporate all of that wisdom. I feel overwhelmed in a way because it's like being so privileged as I am, middle-aged white guy, well-educated, all of that sort of stuff, educated in a Western deterministic sort of linear way of thinking, that there's so much mystery involved in a way. And yeah, I really appreciate these opportunities to learn from everyone, because it's like drinking from a font of knowledge and wisdom. So thank you. Appreciate everyone.
More needed. David.
I absolutely echo all of that. And just to say that every kind of coaching, we're really improv artists. We're responding in the moment. And I just like to thank everybody and congratulate everybody about the calmness with which, and Dumi in particular for his intervention, the calmness and supportiveness which this totally unexpected and pretty horrible starting point. Actually, this is what we're about. We take these things and we push them aside. We put them into their proper place.
Yeah. Here. Joy Marie.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity and just to learn and share and experience. I'm just reminded also of the quote from Alvin Toffler, who said, the illiterate of the 21st century are not those that can read or write, but will be those that cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. And it just feels like in the boardroom, we constantly have to learn, unlearn, and relearn. And it's the same with coaching as well as things evolve. So thank you for the opportunity to share and engage with all of you. Appreciate that.
And we've loved you being here with us.
Thank you.
So in summary, really appreciate everyone's thoughts, and I'm leaving thinking I want to go coach even more boards so I can integrate some of this learning into practice. And it really is a learning journey, isn't it? Because every board's so different with their context and nuances. Let's keep this going. We will be moving into sharing some slightly longer programs that we'll be delivering together, this small cohort of leaders in coaching. And we appreciate everyone for your input. We'll keep you posted, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Indeed. Go safe and well, everybody. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. I will leave you. Okay.
Thank you. Appreciate you being with
Yeah.
us.
Thanks.
Yeah. Are you okay after that interruption?